Good morning, everyone. This is Mr. London, and I'm going to record myself explaining this PowerPoint so that way, in case you missed anything in class, in case you came in late, or if you were absent that day, you can go back over this video and catch up on what you missed in class. All right. So I'm going to start where we started at the beginning of the week, and we're going to talk about carbon and carbon compounds. And when I use the word carbon compounds, it really means the same thing as macromolecules and organic molecules. All of these things mean the same thing, and they're referring to carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, which includes DNA and RNA, and lipids, like which are fats and oils, because these are the four things, the four giant molecules that make up living things. We get them mostly from eating other things. So we get proteins, carbs, and lipids from eating other things, and we make nucleic acids ourselves. We make DNA ourselves. So what are these organic molecules made of? They're made of mostly these six elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And in class, we use the word CHNOPS to help us remember these six elements. But the two most important, actually the most important, is carbon. And we're going to talk why that is later. So again, these are the six elements that are found in these giant carbohydrates and lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So what's so great about carbon? Carbon is unique because it is the only element that can form four chemical bonds. So if we look here at the bottom, you can see the C, which is the chemical symbol for carbon, and you can see the four lines coming from it. Okay, those represent chemical bonds. So if we look at the one that kind of looks like a snowflake at the bottom, we can see a C right in the middle, and we can see four lines coming from it. So it's bonded with four other carbons, and then those carbons have four bonds with hydrogen, as well as another carbon. So if you want to build a giant molecule, you want an element that can bond with four different elements at the same time. That way you can really branch off and create all these different molecules. And that's why carbon is so unique. Okay. So it forms the backbone, kind of the backbone of the molecules that form our bodies. Just like our backbone has all those bones that form our skeleton, coming from our backbone. So also, carbon is able to bond with all these other elements, whether it's carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, or sulfur. Okay, and it forms these giant macromolecules built of small subunits, small pieces linked together to form bigger molecules. So basically, what I'm trying to say is these macromolecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, are built of smaller building blocks linked together to form these big molecules. And these building blocks are called monomers. So monomers are linked together to form polymers. So just like a brick wall is made of many bricks, a protein is made of many monomers. Okay, a carbohydrate is built of many monomers. So here we can see simple sugars in this black box right here. We can see simple sugars are the monomer for carbohydrates. When we link those simple sugars together, these little hexagon-shaped yellow shapes, we get these big long chains, and those are polymers. Okay, so I just want to get everyone to get used to the vocabulary. The building block for these large molecules are called monomers, and when you link them together, you form polymers. All right. So again, we use this analogy to describe a brick wall. You take a brick wall, If a brick wall is that entire giant polymer, right, that big molecule, the building block or the monomer for this brick wall would be a brick. When you link the bricks together, then you get a brick wall. The monomer for the Lego shoe would be one piece of Lego. The polymer would be the Lego shoe. Okay? So again, what are these four organic molecules, these four macromolecules? They're carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. So where do we get carbohydrates? We get them from eating bread, pasta, rice, sugars. All these are carbohydrates. They're mainly for energy. Lipids are your fats and oils. We get them from eating anything that really tastes good, like ice cream, cake, butter, cream. Nucleic acids are DNA and RNA, and then we have proteins, which are found in our meats and our peanuts, steak, really any kind of meat or mostly meat. All right, we're going to skip this. So let's focus on carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are the main source of energy for all living things. Excuse me, I'm just going to close this door. So carbohydrates are the main source of energy for all living things, whether it's a bacteria, an animal, or a plant. And they're made of three elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So here on the bottom left, we have a glucose molecule. We're going to talk about why glucose is important in a bit. And these are some of the different foods that are found in carbohydrates. So sugars. Sugars are the building block for carbohydrates. Like I mentioned, every different type of macromolecule has a building block. For carbohydrates, that building block is sugar. One example is glucose. So glucose is the building block for all of the, along with fructose and other sugars, are the building blocks for all the carbohydrates that are found in wheat, spaghetti, rice. All of those things are many, many, many sugars linked together to form a giant, giant polymer. Okay? So the monomer for carbohydrates is a sugar molecule. Fructose is another sugar, and it's mostly found in fruit. So again, let's reinforce the vocabulary. We have a glucose molecule here that is the monomer of a carbohydrate. When you link it together with other sugars, other glucose molecules, you get a long polymer. And in this case, the polymer for carbohydrates is called a polysaccharide. So a polysaccharide is the polymer for carbohydrates. Okay. How do we remember that? Poly means many, and saccharide means sugar. So that literally means many sugars. Let's start with starch. So there are two types of polysaccharides I want you to know. Starch is the polysaccharide that's found in plants, and plants use that to store energy. So wheat, rice, all of those things are very high in starch because the plant is using them to store food. When animals eat the plant, they're actually eating that starch that the plant made, and they're getting that energy by eating the plant. So starch is a polysaccharide, and it is used for energy. The other kind of polysaccharide I want you guys to know is called cellulose. So cellulose is not used for energy. It's actually used to help the plant maintain its shape. Okay, just like our skeleton helps us, stand up and help us basically stand upright and maintain our body structure. Without our skeleton, we'd be a big pile of mush. Well, plants don't have skeletons, but they do have this polysaccharide called cellulose, and it basically forms this carbohydrate skeleton around the cell, around the plant cell in their cell wall. And we know it as fiber. So if you look at the back of your cereal box, you can see how much fiber is in your cereal. That's actually a carbohydrate called cellulose. And cellulose is another example of a polysaccharide. All right, guys. So let's review. Polysaccharides are large molecules. They're polymers. They're carbohydrate polymers. We talked about two examples. Starch, which is used for energy storage in plants. And we talked about cellulose, which gives plants their strength. It gives them their shape, their structure. So again, if we look at this picture here, we've got a list of polysaccharides. Again, these are carbohydrates, carbohydrate polymers. At the top, we have starch, which is an energy storage polysaccharide in plants. So each of those little those little pink shapes represents one sugar, which is the monomer. When you link those sugars together, you get starch. Another example we mentioned at the bottom is cellulose. Again, each of those little pink hexagons, those little six-sided shapes, represents a sugar molecule linked together to form a giant polysaccharide. In this case, that is cellulose or fiber. Okay, so that's a sugar, and that the whole thing is called a polysaccharide. All right, guys, so now we're going to move on to lipids. So lipids, one feature that all lipids have in common is that they're not soluble in water. So if you try to mix a lipid with water, they don't mix together. For example, two examples of lipids that we all know about are fat and oil. So if you try to mix olive oil or melt butter and you try to mix it with water, they don't mix because they are not soluble. The word soluble means it mixes together. Okay, so lipids, fats and oils do not mix with water. They're what we call hydrophobic. So that word literally means fear of water. No, they're not afraid of water, but what that's that basically what that means is that they don't mix with water. So if anything's hydrophobic, it means it's not soluble in water, and lipids are an example of that. So what elements do we find in lipids? We find carbon and hydrogen and a tiny amount of oxygen, okay? But it's mostly long chains of carbon and hydrogen. And for examples, two of them we already mentioned. There's fats, there's oils, okay? So what's the difference between a fat and oil? An oil is liquid at normal temperature, and a fat is solid. So think about fat as like the that white part on the edge of your steak, right? That's it's solid at normal temperature, okay? Unless you put it on the grill, then it starts to melt, okay? And waxes are also considered lipids. So some plants have a wax layer around them to protect them against the very dry desert conditions. And also steroids are another example of lipids. And examples of steroids are hormones in our body like testosterone and estrogen. So if you've ever heard of people taking steroids to get stronger, they're actually taking extra testosterone, which is a steroid. Okay, guys. So what's the function of a lipid? The function of a lipid is energy. So lipids store energy, and they're part of the cell membrane. So one of them refers to the lipids we use for food, and the other is found in the cell membrane. And we're going to talk about why that is. And of course, they're also used for keeping things waterproof. And I might use the example of plants that live in the desert. For example, the cactus has a wax layer around it to prevent water from escaping from the plant in the desert. So fats, well, let's start with fat. So fats are, again, the main function of fat is energy storage. So if you eat more calories than you burn off, your body's going to accumulate fat. That's true for all animals. So fats are found in animals mostly. In your some meats have more fat than others. So, for example, red meat tends to be very high in fat. Um, Fish, not so much. But the main purpose for fat inside a living thing, inside an animal, is energy storage. All right. Now, the scientific term for a fat is a triglyceride. Okay. Why is it called a triglyceride? So, in order to know that, you have to break down the word. So, tri, as in like a tricycle or a triangle, means three. Okay. It's called a triglyceride because it has three of these long fatty acid tails extending from the middle of the molecule. So if we look here at the bottom, we can see a shape that kind of looks like a long E, and those yellow tail-like structures where it says CH2, those are your fatty acids. And because it has three of them, it's called a triglyceride. Okay, so triglyceride is another name for fat. And that's used for energy in animals. Okay. Now, there are triglycerides also found in plants, but those are usually your oils. So they're actually a healthier kind of fat. Phospholipids are found in the cell membrane. So I mentioned that there are two kinds of lipids we're going to focus on, and this second kind is not used for energy. It's actually all the cell membranes, and every kind of living thing has a cell membrane. They're actually made of lipids. A phospholipid is something that has two fatty acid tails. So instead of three like the triglyceride, it only has two, and it has it basically looks like a head with two legs. Okay, those two legs are your fatty acids, because fatty acids are the monomer for lipids, and and uh, and it forms a double layer in the cell membrane. So why would a cell want lipids to make up the cell membrane? Why not proteins? Because it provides a waterproof layer around the cell. Because remember, lipids are hydrophobic, right? So anything that is, if the cell is in a watery environment, it wants to be waterproof. That way, anything that's in the water, let's say it's in a plant or in the blood of an animal, like a bacteria or a poison, it can't get into the cell because the cell is waterproof, and it's also impenetrable to anything that isn't waterproof, like a bacteria or a cell. So it forms like this waterproof layer around the cell.